You were taught that ancient Egypt was a civilization of wonder. Of pyramids. Of pharaohs. Of gold. But what they never taught you in school, was the darkness underneath. The blood rituals. The human sacrifices. The torture chambers buried beneath the sand. The secrets so disturbing that Egyptologists spent decades debating whether to reveal them at all. This is not the Egypt you know. This is the real dark side of ancient Egypt. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. For thousands of years, ancient Egypt has captured the imagination of the world. The Great Pyramid. The Sphinx. Cleopatra. Tutankhamun. These are the stories that filled our history books and our museums. But history has a habit of only showing us what it wants us to see. And for a very long time, the darker truths of ancient Egyptian civilization were buried just as carefully as the pharaohs themselves. In recent decades, archaeologists and Egyptologists have uncovered evidence that tells a very different story. A story of power, cruelty, obsession and darkness that existed alongside all that gold and glory. What you are about to hear comes directly from archaeological discoveries, translated ancient texts, and the findings of the world's leading Egyptologists. This is not myth. This is history. And it is far darker than anything Hollywood ever showed you. When the earliest pharaohs died, they did not go alone. Archaeological excavations at Abydos, the ancient royal burial ground, uncovered something deeply disturbing. Surrounding the tombs of Egypt's first pharaohs were rows upon rows of smaller graves. Inside those graves were the bodies of servants, courtiers, craftsmen and even animals. These people had not died of natural causes. Analysis of their remains showed they were young and healthy at the time of death. They were killed specifically to accompany their pharaoh into the afterlife. This practice, known as retainer sacrifice, was carried out on a massive scale during Egypt's earliest dynasties. Pharaoh Jur, one of Egypt's first rulers, was buried with over 300 sacrificed individuals surrounding his tomb. 300 people. Killed. So a dead king would have servants in the next world. The practice eventually disappeared in later dynasties, replaced by symbolic servant statues called shabtis. But for the earliest centuries of Egyptian civilization, human sacrifice was an accepted and organized part of royal death. And the most chilling part? Evidence suggests some of these individuals went willingly. Raised from childhood to believe that dying with the pharaoh was the highest possible honor. Mummification is perhaps the most famous aspect of ancient Egyptian culture. But what the museum exhibits and the textbooks leave out, is how truly horrifying the process actually was. It began with the brain. Embalmers would insert a long metal hook through the deceased's nostril, break through the thin bone into the skull, and use the hook to liquefy the brain from the inside. The liquid brain matter was then drained out through the nose. Then came the organs. A cut was made in the left side of the abdomen. The embalmer would reach inside and remove the liver, lungs, stomach and intestines by hand. Each organ was then treated, wrapped and placed inside special containers called canopic jars. The heart was left inside the body. Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of the soul and intelligence. It could not be removed. What makes this even more disturbing is that this process was not always performed after death. Ancient texts and some archaeological evidence suggest that in certain cases, the process may have begun while the individual was still alive. The entire mummification process took 70 days. 70 days of treating, wrapping, and preparing a human body. All in service of a belief system so powerful that it drove one of the greatest civilizations in human history. We are only halfway through. And what comes next goes even deeper into the darkness that ancient Egypt tried to hide from history. For centuries, the popular image of pyramid construction involved hundreds of thousands of enslaved people beaten and whipped under the desert sun. Modern archaeology has challenged parts of this image. But what it replaced it with is arguably just as dark. The workers who built the pyramids were not all slaves. Many were paid laborers. But the conditions they worked under were brutal beyond imagination. Skeletal remains found in the workers' village near Giza tell a devastating story. Almost every skeleton shows evidence of severe spinal damage, crushed vertebrae, broken bones that healed incorrectly, and arthritis so advanced it would have been crippling. These were people whose bodies were destroyed by their work. Workers as young as 13 were found among the remains. Children whose growing bones were permanently damaged by carrying stones that weighed more than they did. Medical records written on ancient papyrus, discovered in the 20th century, document the injuries in clinical detail. Crushed limbs. Broken backs. Workers ground to death under falling stones. The papyrus records these deaths with the same detachment one might use to record the weather. And when workers died on the job, which happened regularly, their bodies were simply buried nearby and work continued without pause. The pyramid did not stop for the dead. The pyramid was the only thing that mattered. When Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, a warning was reportedly found inscribed near the entrance. A curse promising death to all who disturbed the pharaoh's rest. Most historians dismissed this as superstition. Until the deaths began. Lord Carnarvon, the man who funded the excavation, died just 5 months after the tomb was opened. His death was sudden and mysterious. At the exact moment of his death in Cairo, witnesses reported that all the lights in the city went out simultaneously. Back in England, his dog reportedly howled and dropped dead at the same moment. Over the following years, a remarkable number of people connected to the tomb's opening died under unusual circumstances. Egyptologist Arthur Mace, one of the first to enter the tomb, died shortly after complaining of a strange exhaustion he could not explain. Radiologist Archibald Reed, who X-rayed the mummy, died suddenly on his return to England. Scientists have offered rational explanations. Ancient tombs can harbor deadly mold spores and toxic gases that accumulate over thousands of years. Opening a sealed tomb releases these substances directly into the faces of the archaeologists. But here is what the rational explanation cannot account for. Howard Carter, the man who actually opened the sarcophagus and handled the mummy more than anyone, lived for another 17 years. If toxic mold was the answer, why did the man with the most exposure survive the longest? To this day, the curse of Tutankhamun has never been fully explained. In ancient Egypt, there was a punishment considered far worse than death. It was called damnatio memoriae, the erasure of a person's existence from all of history. The Egyptians believed that a person's soul could only survive in the afterlife if their name and image was preserved somewhere in the living world. Destroy every record of a person's existence, and you destroyed their soul for eternity. Pharaoh Thutmose III used this weapon with terrifying precision against his own stepmother, Hatshepsut. One of the most powerful pharaohs in Egyptian history, Hatshepsut ruled as a female pharaoh for over 20 years. She built temples, led military campaigns and expanded Egypt's wealth dramatically. When Thutmose finally came to power, he systematically erased her. Every image of her face was chiseled off temple walls. Every inscription bearing her name was cut out of the stone. Every statue was smashed and buried in pits. Her cartouche, the royal seal, was replaced with his name or simply destroyed. For 3,000 years, it worked. Hatshepsut was completely forgotten by history. It was not until 1903 that Egyptologist Howard Carter began piecing together evidence of her existence from damaged inscriptions and buried statue fragments. A woman who ruled one of the greatest empires in human history, nearly erased forever. Not by war. Not by conquest. But by a man with a chisel and 3,000 years of time. And Hatshepsut was not the only victim. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to replace Egypt's gods with a single deity, suffered the same fate after his death. His successors tore down his temples, smashed his statues, and removed his name from every surface they could find. His city was abandoned and swallowed by the desert. Ancient Egypt did not just bury its dead. Sometimes, it buried the living too. Ancient Egypt was one of the greatest civilizations ever to exist on this planet. Its achievements, in architecture, medicine, astronomy and art, still humble us thousands of years later. But greatness and darkness are not opposites. They have always lived side by side. The people sacrificed to follow their pharaoh into death. The workers whose bodies were destroyed building monuments to gods they would never meet. The mummies prepared in darkness over 70 horrifying days. The curse that killed the people who found it. And the rulers whose very existence was erased by those who feared their memory. This was the real ancient Egypt. Not just the gold and the glory that history chose to remember. But the blood and the darkness and the obsession with power and death that made it all possible. The sand of Egypt hides more secrets than we may ever fully uncover. And perhaps, some of them were buried for a reason.